The Savannah night dripped with heat, the air thick as velvet, while the Forsyth Grand Hotel gleamed like a palace carved from light. Its chandeliers poured gold onto the cobblestone courtyard, where whispers carried like secrets under moss-draped oaks. Into this picture walked Marcus Langston, a tall black man in a razor-cut suit, polished shoes tapping steadily against stone, and a gold monogrammed briefcase swinging lightly at his side. He looked like someone with purpose, but to Karen Whitaker, the hotel manager, he looked like someone out of place. She cut across the entrance with a sharp smile, snapped her fingers as if summoning a waiter, and said, "Service doors around back." Phones lifted at once. A hush fell. One guest whispered, "Did she just say that?" Lena Carter, 25, already had her Instagram live rolling, her caption burning across screens. Hotel manager humiliates black man at Forsyth Grand. Viewer numbers pulsed upward, 10, 50, 100, comments stacking faster than Lena could read. Marcus didn't blink. The Rolex on his wrist ticked toward 3 o'clock. His voice came low and precise, carrying weight. "I have a meeting in your Magnolia room," he said. Karen smirked, crossing her arms, nails catching the light as she pointed again to the staff-only sign. Her laugh was short and dismissive, like she already believed she'd won. The courtyard vibrated with tension. Guests shifted, torn between outrage and silence, while Spanish moss swayed like a curtain ready to fall. Marcus's briefcase glinted again, but this time, the light seemed to signal something bigger, something hidden. Lena's camera zoomed in, capturing the collision of arrogance and quiet power, and just when the crowd thought they understood the scene, Marcus leaned in and said 7 words that made Karen freeze, her confidence cracking in real time. What he said next will change everything. Marcus entered the Forsyth Grand with composed authority, quietly. His tailored charcoal suit fit perfectly, a white shirt shone, a navy silk tie lay precise, and his Rolex ticked toward a 3 p.m. board meeting in the Magnolia room. He was CEO of Apex Enterprises, a $10 million client, and his steady voice carried a generosity that did not perform. Savannah's riverfront sent salted breezes through revolving doors, and historic brick facades outside caught afternoon light like patient mirrors. Inside, brass rails gleamed, palms stirred conditioned air, and a fountain murmured under a chandelier's sparkle. Marcus crossed the lobby with an easy gait and stopped at the concierge, where Karen stood behind a screen as if policy were armor. She had misheard his name, bungled the confirmation code, and asked for a printed pass even while the booking glowed on her monitor. Marcus answered evenly, "Marcus Ellison, Apex Enterprises. Our board meets at 3. The Magnolia room is booked, under Apex and Peterson Hospitality Partners. Please call events or the regional director, Diane Peterson." Karen stiffened. "Sir, you are interrupting a workflow. Without a physical pass or an email displayed, you cannot proceed." He slid a card across the desk. "Judgment will resolve this. In seconds," he said. She recoiled from the card as if it were provocative and reached for the phone. "Security will verify your identity." Lena, visiting from Charlotte, had been streaming the lobby's chandeliers and palm planters for a small audience. Sensing friction, she pivoted, retitled the broadcast "Gatekeeping at the Forsyth," and narrated with bright restraint. "A well-dressed man says he's a CEO with a reserved room. The desk attendant disagrees." The viewer counter flickered to 200. Across town, Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, 70, retired civics teacher and longtime reader of coded situations, watched with disapproval and texted her activist grandson, Donovan. "Something off at the Forsyth," she wrote. "Come if you can." Karen spoke loudly in the lobby. "Tom, please come to the concierge. We have an individual refusing to cooperate." Marcus rested his folio on the counter. "I am cooperating," he said. "I am asking you to call events." "Do not raise your voice," she replied, though his voice had not moved. Tom arrived from a side corridor, sturdy, cordial, attentive. "Afternoon," he said. "What's happening?" "He claims a boardroom," Karen said. "Under a name I cannot confirm." Marcus addressed Tom directly. "I am Marcus Ellison. Apex Enterprises reserved the Magnolia Room months ago under Peterson Hospitality Partners. Diane Peterson is upstairs." Tom examined the folio, glanced at the Rolex, then considered Marcus's steady expression. "Let's call events," he suggested. Karen frowned. "I handle this desk," she said. "He can wait." Lena kept streaming, careful not to obstruct. Her comments split between people insisting on procedure and people recognizing that courtesy is also a rule. Marcus pictured the walnut table upstairs, the water pitchers, the agendas aligned, and kept his tone level. "I will stand aside," he told Tom. "Please verify the booking." Tom nodded. Karen's smile tightened. "He will stand where I can see him." Through the doors, Savannah exhaled river air. Carriages rolled across worn brick, and tour guides rehearsed lesser histories. Upstairs, Diane Peterson reviewed notes and admired the Magnolia Room's crown molding and botanical prints, unaware of the stalemate downstairs. Mrs. Brooks arrived with Donovan, who set his canvas bag by a planter and observed without stepping forward. "Listen to the words," she whispered. "They will tell the story." Karen resumed typing. "Sir, if you continue to obstruct operations, I will have you removed." "I am preventing an avoidable mistake," Marcus said. "Expensive for everyone." Tom's brow lifted. "I remember a charity gala in the courtyard," he said. "Jazz trio, scholarships, photographs by the fountain." "Apex hosted that gala," Marcus replied. "We funded the scholarships." Tom smiled slightly. "My niece received one." "Congratulations," Marcus said. Karen tapped harder. "Anecdotes do not prove access," she said. Mrs. Brooks addressed the desk calmly. "Credentials include memory and relationship," she observed. "Service is cumulative." Lena's viewers began to note Marcus's restraint. Two Apex directors exited the elevator, greeted their CEO, and turned to Karen. "Is the Magnolia Room ready?" Karen wavered. "We will reconfirm." Tom dialed events, read the reservation number aloud, and listened as a supervisor confirmed the space for Apex Enterprises under Peterson Hospitality Partners and added that Diane Peterson had requested escorts for arriving executives. Tom thanked them and ended the call. "They are expecting Mr. Ellison," he told Karen. The lobby released a breath. Karen flushed, then composed herself. Marcus spoke before resentment could gather. "Procedure matters," he said. "Judgment matters too." "We can talk later about both," she nodded. "Tom," Marcus added, "would you escort us upstairs?" "Absolutely," Tom said. The group crossed the lobby, passed the fountain, and entered the elevator. The city's air seemed to rise with them, fragrant with magnolia and brine. Numbers lit in sequence as the car climbed. When the doors opened, the Magnolia Room shone exactly as promised. A walnut table, agendas, name cards, crystal pitchers, and a centered arrangement of magnolia and fern. Diane turned from the window, surprise shifting into apology as Tom summarized events neutrally. "I am sorry," she told Marcus. "I should have sent someone earlier." "We are right on time," he said. He took his place, set the folio down, and felt the room steady. Below, Karen stood at the desk, the chandeliers throwing patient glitter onto a quieter lobby. Lena ended the stream with a reflection on listening and the public grace of private institutions. Across town, Mrs. Brooks returned to her peaches and texted Donovan, "Steadiness won, as it should." Savannah resumed its rhythm. Barges slid along the river, coach wheels whispered across brick, and storefront windows caught the afternoon's lengthening gold. Marcus began the meeting with the same calm tone. He laid out growth corridors, port expansions, training investments, and community partnerships designed to honor neighborhoods while improving throughput. He thanked the hotel for past service and stated that future business would depend on professionalism balanced with perspective. Tom lingered at the door, a quiet witness whose presence reminded everyone that authority can sound like help. The Rolex kept time, not urging, not forgiving, simply anchoring. Directors spoke, exchanged data, and confirmed commitments. Marcus listened, asked for clarity, and noted action items. Outside the windows, the river traveled east with unhurried certainty, a physical reminder that direction matters more than speed when the course is true. When the agenda concluded, he thanked Tom for the escort and asked Diane to pass on his appreciation to the events. He paused at the window, took one breath, and allowed satisfaction to register. In the lobby, Karen called events to request a debrief and added a note to the Apex reservation. Escort on arrival, confirm with courtesy. Not a scene, just a plan. Marcus joined his directors at the elevator afterward, shook Tom's hand, thanked Diane again, and returned to work. Lena posted a follow-up caption about grace under pressure. Mrs. Brooks savored a peach half and smiled at the taste. The Forsyth. Grand stood polished, historic, and a little wiser, as if the building itself had remembered what hospitality means. Karen's voice rose above the soft hum of the Forsyth Grand lobby, her hand slicing the air as if every gesture might summon invisible rules to her defense. A few guests paused near the fountain, their conversations tapering into whispers. Others drifted from the bar or elevators, curiosity piqued by her theatrics. The polished marble floor reflected anxious stares as the moment swelled into something heavier than a simple misunderstanding. Marcus, centered in composure, drew his phone from his jacket pocket with a single calm motion. The Rolex glinted as his thumb swiped, revealing a message from Jamal, his assistant. Boardroom ready, Magnolia Room confirmed, directors arriving now. The text, direct and certain, brought confirmation of order against Karen's chaotic performance. Yet when Karen noticed the device, her lips curled into a sneer sharp enough to cut through the murmurs. A phone? A staged screen? Anyone can fake a message these days. She tilted her chin, eyes darting at the forming audience, inviting their agreement. Props don't prove identity. Marcus regarded her without breaking rhythm, sliding the phone back into his pocket as if her words could not dislodge his certainty. Across the lobby, Lena lifted her phone higher. Her live stream viewer count leapt toward 500 comments, pouring faster than her eyes could track. "This is racism in 2025, one message flashed. Another typed, "How many times will dignity be questioned just for existing in a suit?" Reactions split, yet the energy coalesced into outrage against bias. The words scrolled in real time, creating a chorus that the chandelier light seemed almost to reflect. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, standing steady near the potted palms, shook her head with deliberate clarity. Her years as a civics teacher carved lines of patience across her face, yet her voice carried thunder when she addressed Karen. "Shameful," she declared, each syllable measured, undeniable. "To dismiss a man with credentials, with calm proof, before the eyes of your community, this is what corrodes trust. You embarrass not only him, but yourself and every institution tied to this building." Her words snapped the air taut. A hush rippled through the gathering, as if even the fountain paused mid-bubble. Tom, the guard, shifted his weight uneasily. His training told him to follow procedure, but his instincts warned that Karen's performance was pushing them toward disaster. His eyes flickered between Marcus's calm and Karen's indignation, torn between policy and conscience. Sweat dotted his brow, though the air was cool. He half extended a hand toward Karen, half toward Marcus, uncertain where allegiance should fall. Upstairs, Diane Peterson, regional director, adjusted papers in preparation for the Magnolia meeting. Her phone buzzed with relentless pings. Notifications stacked one after another. Forsyth racism trending across multiple platforms. Lena's live stream being shared, snippets clipped, commentary flooding timelines. Diane's pulse quickened as she scrolled the words bias, humiliation, unfair judgment. She realized this was no minor customer service dispute. It was a reputational wildfire, already escaping the confines of the lobby. Back below, Marcus placed his folio on the counter with deliberate grace, flipping open the brass clasp. He drew forth embossed documents, contracts bearing Apex Enterprises insignia, signed agreements referencing the Forsyth Grand, receipts for payments that dwarfed 10 million. He laid them flat, neat, indisputable. These, Marcus said evenly, are records of our partnership. Confirm them with your system. They are not props. They are the foundation of our continued investment in this establishment. His voice did not rise, but its steadiness pressed heavier than anger ever could. Karen's eyes darted across the papers, then dismissed them with a sharp laugh. Anyone can print letterhead, sign names, forge stamps. Forgery is a craft, sir. Your performance may impress strangers, but not me. You want access, and you think theatrics will grant it. She raised her hands dramatically, addressing the audience rather than Marcus. Do not be fooled by expensive suits or staged documents. This is manipulation. Lena's live stream audience reacted instantly. Comment floods slammed the screen. She refuses written proof? What else must he show? DNA? This is spectacle, not procedure. Viewers urged others to share, to speak, to confront prejudice disguised as professionalism. Numbers climbed. 600, 700, 800. The crowd in the lobby pressed closer, phones lifted, screens glowing like a constellation of witnesses. Marcus, unflinching, gathered the documents but left them visible on the counter, a silent declaration of confidence. He addressed the crowd now, his steady gaze turning outward. You see what is happening. Authority questioned, evidence denied, dignity dismissed. But this moment is not only about me. It is about every person ever judged unfairly before their truth was heard. He paused, voice resonant in the marble chamber. Have you ever been judged unfairly? Share your story to expose bias. Do not let silence preserve injustice. The words hung with force, a call that bridged lobby and live stream, audience and participants. Mrs. Brooks nodded firmly, eyes bright with memory of marches and classrooms where she had urged students to resist quiet erasure. Donovan, her grandson, tapped his phone, posting Marcus's words instantly, encouraging followers to respond. Comments multiplied, testimonies pouring from strangers recounting interviews lost, promotions denied, assumptions made, respect withheld. The hashtag surged faster, a current impossible to contain. Tom's hesitation deepened, but so did his resolve. He cleared his throat. Karen, he said carefully, procedures are written to serve truth, not obstruct it. We have confirmation. Upstairs. We have recognition from the staff. We have identification and documentation. At some point, disbelief ceases to be caution and becomes hostility. I cannot stand by that. His words, though measured, drew quiet applause from scattered onlookers. Karen's face tightened, anger shading into something brittle. You undermine protocol, she snapped. You must protect this establishment, not indulge charades. But the words lacked weight against the cascade of evidence, the clarity of Marcus's demeanor, the swelling crowd's judgment. Meanwhile, Diane hurried down from the Magnolia room, her heels clicking in sharp urgency across the stairwell landing. She emerged into the lobby, eyes sweeping the crowd, recognizing the disaster before her. Spotting Marcus, she rushed forward, placing a hand on his arm with genuine respect. "Mr. Ellison," she said loudly enough for the room to hear, "I apologize for this delay. The Magnolia Room has been prepared for you and your board. We value your partnership profoundly." Her statement rang through the lobby like a gavel, undeniable, official. Karen staggered under the weight of Diane's declaration. The audience murmured, many recording still, some shaking their heads. Lena whispered into her stream, "Resolution arriving, but the damage is already viral." Her viewers climbed beyond 1,000. Marcus inclined his head toward Diane. "Thank you. I appreciate clarity." He gathered his documents calmly, adjusted his suit, and prepared to proceed. But before stepping away, he looked once more toward the crowd, ensuring his earlier words lingered. "Bias thrives in shadows. Today, you have seen it exposed in the light. Do not leave your stories buried. Share them. Together they change the future." The Rolex ticked toward 3 o'clock, precise, steady. The Magnolia Room awaited. The board would convene. But the lobby remained transformed, no longer a simple space of polished marble and chandeliers, but a stage where bias had been confronted. Dignity defended, truth spoken with unwavering calm. The crowd slowly dispersed. But their phones carried the story outward into feeds and timelines, into conversations across Savannah and beyond. Mrs. Brooks touched Donovan's arm, satisfied. "Steadiness won again," she murmured. Tom returned to his post with renewed conviction, glancing once at Karen, whose authority now appeared fractured, diminished. Diane escorted Marcus upstairs, ensuring his path was clear and unchallenged. Lena ended her stream with gratitude, her final words, echoing Marcus's call. "Have you ever been judged unfairly? Share your story to expose bias." The lobby of the Forsyth Grand pulsed with tension, every chandelier crystal glittering as though it sensed the weight of the moment. Phones hovered in the air, recording every second while whispers rippled among the gathered crowd. Karen stood, rigid behind the concierge desk, arms crossed, lips drawn tight into a line of forced control. Marcus remained steady, his tailored suit sharp against the marble backdrop, his Rolex ticking toward the very meeting time that was slipping away. The folio of documents rested on the counter like quiet thunder, each page a silent rebuke of Karen's accusations. Lena's livestream viewer count climbed faster than the fountain bubbled, the numbers soaring beyond 1,000, then 1,500, nearing 2,000. Comments flashed in a torrent. "Exposed bias live. Unbelievable, she still doubts him. History is unfolding right here in Savannah." The crowd shifted as footsteps clicked across polished tile. Diane Peterson, regional director, appeared from the stairwell, her face flushed from haste and her phone buzzing still with notifications. She spotted Marcus instantly, recognition dawning with startling clarity. Horror etched across her features as she caught the embossed Apex Enterprises insignia on the folio. She approached swiftly, eyes wide. "Mr. Ellison?" she asked, almost breathless. "Marcus Ellison?" The name carried through the lobby, striking like a gavel. Murmurs rippled, the words repeated among guests like an echo growing louder. Karen blinked, her posture faltering. "Wait, Ellison?" Her voice cracked, though she tried to steady. "It?" Diane pressed forward, picking up the top page from the folio. Her hands trembled as she scanned the familiar contract header, the 10-man figure bold in the margin, and beneath it, Marcus's flowing signature anchoring the agreement. The weight of realization pulled her expression into a mask of mortified regret. She turned to the crowd, voice shaking but firm. "This is Marcus Ellison, CEO of Apex Enterprises, our most significant client, partner, and benefactor. His company's investment exceeds $10 million. Gasps broke across the lobby like a wave. Guests exchanged incredulous stares. Phones lifted higher. A young couple near the fountain whispered, the CEO himself. Lena, barely containing her shock, narrated into her camera. You heard it here first. Apex Enterprises, $10 million on the line, and he was just humiliated at the desk. Her stream count spiked past 2,000, the comment section exploding with outrage, sympathy, and calls for accountability. Karen's face drained of color. Her fingers tightened against the desk, knuckles whitening as reality crashed down. The contract shimmered under chandelier light, undeniable proof that every word Marcus had spoken had been accurate. Sir, she stammered, her voice fragile, thin as paper. I didn't realize. Please forgive. But her apologies faltered into the rising tide of judgment from the watching crowd. Marcus did not raise his voice, nor gloat, nor lash out. Instead, he opened his folio once more with deliberate calm and drew forth another document. This time, the header read Apex Enterprises Diversity Compliance Standards, stamped with corporate insignia, signed and dated, a directive written with clarity and resolve. He placed it gently on the counter for all to see. His voice carried, steady, composed, resonant. Apex does not partner with institutions that dismiss, demean, or discriminate. Our contracts include mandatory diversity compliance. This document outlines requirements, training, audits, and ongoing accountability. If Forsyth Grand wishes to retain Apex's partnership, implementation must begin immediately. The crowd inhaled sharply at his words. Lena's viewers exploded with reactions. This is leadership. Not just defense. He's creating change. Respect. Mrs. Brooks nodded solemnly from her place near the palm planter, pride flickering in her eyes as she whispered, That is how truth stands. Her grandson Donovan typed furiously into his phone, posting Marcus's words in real time, urging followers to demand broader reform. Diane reached for the compliance document with trembling fingers, scanning its precise directives. Her mind raced with calculations. The weight of Apex's investment, the viral storm spreading online, the immediate fallout if the contract collapsed. She swallowed hard and addressed Marcus, voice almost pleading. Mr. Ellison, Apex's partnership is invaluable. We will comply. I will authorize mandatory training across staff beginning this quarter. We will open ourselves to independent audits. Please, allow us the chance to demonstrate accountability. Karen stood silent, her earlier bravado shattered. Sweat beaded along her hairline. She fumbled for words, finally managing. Mr. Ellison, I deeply apologize. I should never have doubted, never have spoken that way. Please understand. Her sentence dissolved under the gaze of those around her. Guests eyed her with disdain, whispers turning sharp. How quickly she folds now, 10 million to learn. Respect. Marcus did not look at her directly, though his voice addressed every soul in the room, every witness live on Lena's stream. Apologies matter less than action. Accountability is what transforms institutions. Compliance will not be optional. It will be enforced. Apex does not bend its principles, no matter how luxurious the setting. His words carved themselves into memory, steady as riverstone, immovable as the facades outside. Lena leaned closer to her camera, eyes wide, whispering to her growing audience. We're watching change demanded in real time. Viewers poured. Comments. Moments like this spark change. How would you demand accountability? The subtle call to action echoed Marcus's ethos, pushing the story beyond the lobby into homes, offices, conversations across the city, and beyond. The hashtag #DaForsythRacism surged, joined now by #Demand Accountability. Diane, scrambling to preserve what she could, clasped Marcus's hand with contrition. We will sign the addenda immediately. I will send written confirmation before the end of the day. Please trust we will correct this failure. Her voice broke slightly, sincerity puncturing the polish of her corporate cadence. Marcus inclined his head, collected the documents into his folio, and fastened the clasp. His composure remained flawless, though the steel in his words left no room for misinterpretation. See that you do. Accountability is not a favor to me. It is a responsibility to every guest, every employee, every future partner who trusts your doors will welcome them with respect. The crowd stirred with a low rumble of agreement. Some clapped softly, others murmured affirmations. Phones captured every second, broadcasting to thousands more than stood present. Karen lowered her gaze, her authority fractured, her role now reduced to silence beneath the weight of truth. Tom, the guard, straightened his posture, pride flickering in his eyes as if he, too, found redemption in Marcus's calm assertion of justice. Mrs. Brooks touched Donovan's shoulder, whispering, "Remember this. Institutions bend only when people hold them accountable." He nodded, thumbs racing across his phone, amplifying Marcus's words. Lena ended her stream with a final reflection, eyes shining. History feels distant until it happens in front of you. Today, bias was challenged and accountability demanded. Moments like this spark change. How would you demand accountability? She tapped the screen and the live stream closed, but the story pulsed outward, unstoppable. Marcus, Rolex marking the precise moment, turned toward the elevator. Diane guided him forward, ensuring no obstacle remained between him and the Magnolia room where Apex's directors awaited. The crowd parted respectfully, phones lowering, murmurs shifting into silence. He stepped into the elevator, suit immaculate, posture unbroken, presence radiating authority earned through steadiness, not spectacle. The doors slid closed, but the lobby remained transformed. Whispers of reform lingered beneath the chandeliers, murmurs of accountability echoed through the marble, and the Forsyth Grand stood changed, its reputation scarred yet salvaged by one man's calm refusal to bend beneath injustice. Outside, Savannah's riverfront breeze curled against the historic brick, carrying with it the weight of a story retold and retweeted, reshaping expectation one voice at a time. The marble lobby of the Forsyth Grand settled into a heavy silence after the storm of revelation, but Marcus understood silence was only a pause before accountability. His tailored suit remained pristine, his Rolex unhurried, yet his presence carried an unmistakable shift. Authority was no longer questioned, it was established. Phones still hovered, recording every movement, the weight of 5,000 digital witnesses pressing through Lena's live stream. Karen stood rigid behind the concierge desk, her face pale, voice caught in her throat, the earlier defiance dissolved into brittle fragility. Diane stood beside Marcus, clutching a pen and folder, her expression tight with recognition that survival of the contract depended entirely on compliance with his following words. Marcus opened his folio one final time, his steady hand placing a fresh set of documents across the polished counter. The embossed header read Apex Enterprises Compliance Addendum. He spoke with the calm precision of a leader accustomed to boardrooms, yet determined to make this lobby a classroom. These are non-negotiable terms. Forsyth Grand will institute mandatory bias training across every department, beginning immediately. Training will not be symbolic but measured, tracked through diversity metrics reported quarterly. Every guest deserves dignity, and Apex requires assurance that measurable improvement will be achieved. He paused, letting the gravity of each word echo through marble and glass, then turned his gaze squarely on Karen. Furthermore, direct accountability must be personal. Ms. Karen will enter a 90-day immersion program. She will shadow employees from diverse backgrounds, not as punishment but as an educational experience. She will listen, learn, and reflect. Only by walking alongside others can understanding root itself in action. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some guests exchanged, looks of disbelief at the boldness of his condition. Phones rose higher, capturing Karen's stunned face as she gripped the edge of the desk, her earlier authority stripped bare. Murmurs stirred. He turned humiliation into transformation. This is how power should be used. Diane inhaled sharply, then steadied herself, recognizing the necessity. She reached for the pen in her folder. "Mr. Ellison," she said, voice clear, though quivering slightly. "Forsyth Grand accepts these terms. I will sign now, binding this institution to compliance, training, metrics, and accountability." She scrawled her name across the agreement, the scratch of ink sounding louder than whispers. She slid the papers back toward Marcus, who examined the signature, then nodded. Lena's voice carried softly into her microphone, narrating for an audience that had grown to 5,000. "We are witnessing corporate strategy as social justice, a CEO using power to shape not only profit, but principle." Her viewers erupted with praise. "Genius move. This is leadership beyond dollars. True accountability." Comments scrolled endlessly, amplifying the moment far beyond Savannah. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, standing tall by the palm planter, pulled her phone from her purse. She typed quickly, sending Donovan the link to the live stream alongside a photograph. She had quietly snapped. "Tell it true," she urged him in a text. Donovan posted immediately to his blog, weaving Marcus's words into a story about dignity defended, contracts wielded for justice, and institutions reshaped under pressure. The post spread quickly, shared by community activists and local readers, amplifying Marcus's stand into civic dialogue. Karen, trembling, finally found her voice, a whisper more than a statement. I understand. I will do what is required." Her words lacked the force of her earlier proclamations, yet sincerity clung to them like a faint promise. Whether the humility was temporary or permanent mattered less than the fact that accountability was no longer optional. Marcus gathered the signed documents, securing them in his folio with the same deliberate calm he had carried since entering the hotel. His gaze swept the crowd, then rested briefly on Lena's phone, addressing both physical and digital audiences. "This is not about one lobby, one contract, or one person. It is about culture. Institutions survive not by polished marble, but by trust, and trust requires accountability. Stand up to injustice in your community. Share how you'd make a difference. Change is not preserved in silence, but in action." The words landed like a charge, an emotional call that leapt from marble to screen, from Savannah to the broader world. Lena's viewers flooded the chat with their vows. "I'll speak up at work. I'll demand fair hiring in my company. I'll challenge bias when I see it." The energy became collective, a tide moving beyond the Forsyths' walls. Outside, twilight descended upon Savannah. Spanish moss draped from live oaks along the riverfront, swaying gently in the evening breeze. Carriages rolled across worn brick, their wheels echoing history. The river shimmered under fading light, its currents steady, carrying reflections of bridges and boats. This backdrop of beauty framed the resolution, reminding every witness that accountability was not separate from place. It was grounded in the soil, air, and community where it occurred. Mrs. Brooks lifted her eyes toward the oaks visible through the glass doors, her voice soft yet resolute. "Justice has roots like these trees," she said to Donovan, who stood recording her words for his blog. "It grows stronger when nourished by action, when guarded by those willing to stand tall." Donovan nodded, typing quickly, ensuring her wisdom would reach an audience far beyond the lobby. Diane clasped her folder to her chest, relief mingling with the weight of responsibility. She knew Apex's conditions would not be easy, but compliance was now survival. "We will begin immediately," she told Marcus. "Training will start tomorrow. Reports will be transparent. This will not remain words on paper," Marcus offered. a nod of acknowledgement, neither gloating nor softening. His calm authority carried more permanence than any flourish could. "See that it is so," he replied. Tom, the guard, stepped forward, his earlier hesitation now replaced with conviction. "Mr. Ellison," he said, "I respect how you carried this. Quiet strength. Not many could do that." Marcus extended a hand, shaking Tom's firmly. "Strength belongs to all who choose integrity," he answered. Tom's nod carried gratitude. The crowd began to disperse, yet conversations continued, in low murmurs. Some guests typed furiously into phones, sharing updates with friends. Others exchanged reflections. "I'll never forget witnessing this." He changed everything without raising his voice. Lena ended her stream with a final statement, eyes gleaming. History unfolded in Savannah tonight. Bias confronted, accountability demanded, community included. 5,000 of you watched live. Now, it's on all of us to act. She tapped her screen and the broadcast concluded, though echoes of Marcus's words already lived across thousands of feeds. Marcus turned toward the elevator, Diane walking at his side. Documents secure. Path transparent. The Rolex ticked into the evening, its rhythm steady as the river's flow. When the doors closed behind him, the lobby remained altered, not merely by spectacle, but by the imprint of justice insisted upon. Outside, twilight deepened into night, stars glimmering above moss-draped oaks, while the river whispered of permanence. Savannah held its breath, knowing a story had been written across its historic heart, a story of accountability demanded by one man but carried forward by many voices. The morning after the confrontation at the Forsyth Grand, Savannah awoke to a storm not of weather but of words. Forsyth racism surged across timelines from Atlanta to London, New York to Cape Town, trending globally as videos from Lena's live stream. Ricocheted through feeds, stitched into commentary, debated on podcasts, and dissected on panels. What began as a lobby incident now pulsed as a cultural reckoning. News tickers scrolled across financial channels. Forsyth Grand Hospitality Group. Stock drops 2% after viral bias incident. Analysts speculated on long-term impact, citing reputational risk as a measurable liability in a world where every phone could broadcast truth to millions. Karen, once so certain behind the concierge desk, found herself in a training room with a stack of victim testimonials. The immersion program Marcus mandated had begun. She read story after story of individuals denied service, overlooked for promotions, treated as less, each account a mirror forcing her to confront the cost of bias. At first, she bristled, defensive, searching for excuses, but the voices on the page did not soften. They spoke of humiliation, of doors closed, of talent dismissed. Slowly, her posture shifted. She scribbled notes in the margins, questions she had never thought to ask herself. 90 days stretched ahead like a road she could no longer avoid. Tom, the guard who once hesitated between procedure and conscience, entered leadership workshops sponsored by Apex's Compliance Fund. In breakout sessions, he listened to case studies, role-played scenarios, and practiced interventions that balanced safety with fairness. His supervisors noted his renewed conviction, his willingness to speak when silence once held him back. "Strength belongs to all who choose integrity," Marcus had told him. Tom repeated the phrase often, writing it at the top of his notebook before each session as a personal creed. Diane, regional director, moved with urgency. She convened an emergency board meeting, laying out the signed compliance addendum and the public relations disaster that followed. "Reform is not optional," she told executives. "Bias training across every department begins immediately. Diversity metrics will be tracked quarterly. Community accountability forums will be scheduled with civic leaders. Budgets shifted overnight, consultants hired, transparency portals built. Staff grumbled at first, yet momentum gathered as the consequences became clear. adapt or collapse. Meanwhile, Apex Enterprises reviewed the contract. Marcus and his directors examined reports from Forsyth Grand, confirming Diane's reforms were more than promises. Quarterly audits showed measurable improvements in hiring practices, guest satisfaction surveys, and equitable promotion rates. With conditions met, Apex renewed its 10 members partnership, signaling both confidence and vigilance. Marcus reminded all parties, compliance is not charity, it is survival in a world where accountability is the new currency. Outside the hotel, a news van parked near the moss-draped oaks that lined the Savannah streets. Reporters conducted live broadcasts, their cameras framing the historic brick facades against a backdrop of twilight river shimmer. Microphones extended toward guests who had witnessed the incident, each recounting the moment bias met accountability. National anchors echoed the story. CEO of Apex Enterprises demands reforms, hotel complies, industry takes note. Indeed, competitors were watching. Hotels across the region convened emergency calls, examining their policies, reviewing staff training, and scrambling to avoid becoming the next viral cautionary tale. Chains released press statements affirming commitments to equity, some genuine, others transparent attempts at damage control. Yet the ripple effect was undeniable. One confrontation in Savannah reshaped expectations across an industry. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, ever the teacher, sat with Donovan at her kitchen table, Spanish moss visible through the window, typing a follow-up piece for his blog. She recounted not only what happened, but why it mattered, weaving Marcus's calm insistence with the voices of the livestream audience who had shared their own experiences. History does not announce itself with banners, she dictated as Donovan typed. It appears in lobbies, in everyday exchanges where dignity is either upheld or denied. One man demanded accountability, but thousands amplified it, and an industry listened. Lena, now recognized beyond Charlotte, appeared on morning shows via video call. Hosts introduced her as the woman whose live stream captured the moment. She repeated what she had witnessed: Marcus's calm, Karen's dismissal, Diane's scramble, the crowd's gasp. Her footage replayed on split screens, while viewers shared their own stories of bias in service industries. She ended each interview with Marcus's call and her own. Your voice can shift industries. Share your experiences to drive change. Karen's days grew long under the weight of immersion. She shadowed housekeeping staff, maintenance crews, and front desk clerks from diverse backgrounds. She listened to their stories, their struggles, their pride, and their frustrations. She stood in kitchens where heat and labor pressed hard, learning the dignity of invisible work. She joined community meetings where guests spoke candidly about bias, absorbing their anger and resilience. Her understanding grew slowly, awkwardly, but undeniably. Tom progressed through his workshops with fresh determination. In one session, he role-played a confrontation, stopping a scenario before it escalated. His facilitator nodded, praising his quick action. Leadership means seeing dignity before conflict, she reminded him. Tom felt the weight of the lesson settle deep, and he resolved never again to hesitate when humanity demanded courage. Diane coordinated quarterly forums, inviting local activists, pastors, and educators to share feedback on Forsyth Grand's progress. Mrs. Brooks attended one, her voice steady as she told executives, "Reforms mean little without community trust. Accountability must be visible, continuous, and personal." Diane listened intently, taking notes, humbled by the clarity of elders who had lived through earlier battles for justice. Stock analysts noted the dip in Forsyth's shares stabilized after Apex renewed the contract. Reform mitigated risk, one analyst remarked. Corporate accountability preserved investor confidence. Articles in financial journals argued that bias was no longer just a moral issue, but a fiscal one, measurable in stock percentages and contract renewals. Marcus, though absent from the daily bustle, continued to monitor compliance. His office released a statement. Apex Enterprises remains committed to partnerships grounded in accountability, equity, and measurable progress. Institutions that honor dignity earn not just contracts, but trust. The words reverberated through business circles, reminding competitors that corporate influence could be wielded not only for profit, but for principle. By dusk, Savannah's river reflected amber light as carriages clattered across cobblestones, moss swaying gently overhead. Guests strolled the waterfront, discussing the story that had turned their city into a headline. Some admired Marcus's restraint, others debated Karen's growth. Still others marveled at the speed with which social media amplified change. The beauty of Twilight framed a truth now etched into the city's memory. Accountability had been demanded, and consequences had followed. Donovan's blog post gained traction, shared by civic groups and industry leaders alike. His words echoed. Marcus's call. Your voice can shift industries. Share your experiences to drive change. Readers responded with stories of restaurants, airlines, schools, and workplaces. Each testimony joined the tide, a collective reminder that bias thrives in silence but weakens when exposed. Karen left her shift one evening, carrying a binder of notes from her immersion program. She paused beneath an oak heavy with moss, reflecting on lessons she never thought she'd face. Tom exited beside her, fresh from another workshop, his step lighter with conviction. "Hard days," he said. Karen nodded, finally without defensiveness. "Necessary days," she admitted. Inside the hotel, Diane reviewed progress reports, ensuring reforms continued beyond the initial shock. She signed approvals for new training modules, community outreach programs, and transparent reporting systems. The Forsyth Grand, scarred yet evolving, became a case study in how institutions could stumble, learn, and change. The lobby, once the stage of humiliation, now carried a different resonance. Guests passed through with the assurance that something had shifted, that their dignity mattered more tangibly than before. Chandeliers glittered still, but beneath their light lingered the memory of a CEO who refused to bend, a live stream that amplified truth, and a community that demanded accountability. 3 months had passed since the confrontation that reshaped the Forsyth Grand, and Savannah moved through spring with azaleas bursting across squares, their blossoms painting corners of the city with renewal. Spanish moss swayed from towering oaks, shading cobblestone paths where carriages rolled steadily past fountains and benches. Yet amid the timeless beauty, the hotel itself reflected change no tourist brochure could have captured. Guest satisfaction surveys revealed a 20% increase, a measurable sign that the institution once scarred by scandal was learning accountability could not only restore dignity but strengthen business. Karen stood at the front of a training room, not behind the polished concierge desk where her voice had once faltered. She wore a crisp blazer, her tone clear yet humble as she addressed a group of managers. On the screen behind her glowed slides detailing diversity compliance standards, strategies for resolving conflict with fairness, and stories drawn from her 90-day immersion. She recounted lessons from shadowing housekeeping staff, listening to maintenance crews, and sitting with community leaders. Each story carried vulnerability, acknowledging mistakes without excuses. Managers leaned forward, pens scratching across, notebooks realizing this was not abstract theory but a lived transformation. Karen had become a teacher of the very principles she once dismissed, her journey a testimony to growth when accountability is embraced. Lena, once an ordinary traveler with a phone and a knack for observation, had seen her live stream transform into a movement. Her follower count swelled, her content evolving from casual updates to focused advocacy. She recorded short clips on corporate accountability, shared interviews with activists, and offered strategies for individuals confronting bias in daily life. Brands reached out for partnerships, yet she refused anything that diluted her message. Viewers began calling her a social justice influencer, though she preferred the term witness. Her mantra echoed Marcus's calm insistence. Dignity defended must be dignity demanded everywhere. She traveled to conferences, spoke on panels, and taught audiences how ordinary voices could spark extraordinary change. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks's grandson, Donovan, watched his blog posts soar beyond anything he had written before. What began as a local reflection on one incident in Savannah became a viral manifesto. Shared by activists, educators, and journalists, the post resonated with a world hungry for stories of bias confronted with integrity. National outlets quoted his words, and community leaders invited him to workshops where young voices shaped civic action. He balanced humility with energy, crediting his grandmother's wisdom for every insight. She sat beside him as he typed follow-ups, her presence grounding his passion. Together, they nurtured a platform that grew beyond commentary into advocacy, amplifying voices long unheard. Meanwhile, Marcus's standards did not remain confined to Forsyth Grand. Apex Enterprises leveraged its contracts with hotels across the country, requiring diversity compliance clauses in every agreement. Within 3 months, 15 hotel chains adopted Apex's dignity standards, embedding mandatory bias training, diversity metrics, and community accountability into operations. Executives, once hesitant to alter practices, now recognize reform not as a burden, but as an expectation. Industry journals featured Marcus on their covers, headlines reading, "CEO turns contracts into change and hospitality, redefined by accountability." Yet Marcus himself remained measured, reminding colleagues, leadership is not wielded through spectacle but through standards that endure. Inside Forsyth Grand, reforms blossomed tangibly. Staff spoke of clearer pathways to promotion, fairer evaluations, and open channels for grievances. Guests noticed not only improved service, but a culture of attentiveness that transcended routine. Politeness. A mother visiting from Chicago commented on her survey, "Respect felt real, not rehearsed." Another traveler from London wrote, "This hotel listens." Such feedback fueled the 20% rise in satisfaction scores, proof that accountability could be measured in smiles as much as spreadsheets. Karen's transformation became symbolic. She mentored junior managers, reminding them that bias, unchecked, could undo reputations and careers, but accountability could rebuild trust. "I was the cautionary tale," she confessed in one training. "Now I choose to be part of the solution." Her humility inspired colleagues, many of whom admitted privately they too had carried unexamined assumptions. Under her guidance, they confronted them, practiced empathy, and learned the discipline of listening before dismissing. Lena's rise expanded beyond screens. She organized community dialogues in cities she visited, partnering with activists to host events titled Witness to Change. Crowds gathered in auditoriums and libraries, sharing stories of injustice and strategies for transformation. Her influence reached younger audiences, especially those who saw in her not a celebrity, but an ordinary person who had raised a phone at the right moment and refused to lower it until the truth was heard. Her tagline spread across shirts and posters, "Witness, Share, Change." Donovan's blog grew into a platform for guest contributors, publishing narratives from hotel staff, flight attendants, teachers, and clerks, each exposing bias and resilience. His readership expanded into tens of thousands, and his grandmother's quotes became recurring features, grounding digital urgency in the wisdom of lived experience. "Justice is patience with teeth," she told him once, and he used it as a headline. He credited her in every interview, her quiet authority shaping the direction of his advocacy. Marcus continued his work with steady focus. In quarterly reports, Apex highlighted not only financial growth, but also social impact. Metrics tracked the implementation of diversity standards, showcasing measurable improvements in equity across partner institutions. Investors applauded, noting that social responsibility translated into loyalty, reputation, and sustainable profit. Marcus remained unswayed by praise, stating in interviews, "We do not celebrate accountability. We expect it. Celebration comes when bias is not newsworthy because it no longer exists." Savannah itself mirrored renewal. Historic squares bloomed with azaleas, fountains glittered in spring sunlight, and tourists wandered shaded paths beneath moss-draped branches. Yet locals felt a more profound shift, a sense of pride that their city had become the backdrop for transformation. Community groups referenced the Forsyth incident in dialogues about schools, policing, and hiring practices, proving that one confrontation could ripple into broader change. Within the hotel, Diane monitored quarterly metrics with precision. She walked the halls more often, not as a distant executive, but as a present leader, greeting staff, listening to guests, and ensuring reforms took root. She acknowledged mistakes openly in staff meetings, encouraging transparency as the new standard. Employees noted her presence, feeling less like cogs in a polished facade and more like contributors to an institution finally learning humility. One evening, as twilight colored the river lavender and gold, Marcus returned quietly to Savannah for a follow-up meeting. He walked through Johnson Square, pausing to admire blooming azaleas, inhaling the fragrance of spring renewal. Locals recognized him, nodding respectfully, not as a spectacle, but as a figure who had shifted the city's story. Entering the Forsyth lobby, he saw Karen leading a training session for night managers. Her tone was confident, her words seasoned with humility. He smiled faintly, recognizing transformation not in headlines, but in steady practice. Lena streamed a reflection from another city that same evening, telling her audience, "What happened in Savannah wasn't a moment. It was a seed. Now, it blooms across hotels, across industries, across voices willing to speak." Her viewers poured comments of commitment, echoing Marcus's ethos with her framing. Donovan published an anniversary post of the incident, charting progress, citing surveys, and reminding readers that vigilance must never fade. His grandmother proofread it, nodding with satisfaction before sending him back to edit a line. "Always leave readers with a charge," she advised. "Change does not sustain itself." And so the story continued, not as scandal, but as transformation rooted in accountability, nurtured by community, amplified by witness, and grounded in a city whose beauty mirrored renewal. Savannah's historic squares, blooming azaleas, and moss-draped oaks bore silent testimony that justice, like spring, returns when cultivated with patience and conviction. 3 seasons had passed since Marcus Ellison's calm defiance in the Forsyth Grand Lobby ignited a wave of accountability, and the consequences of that single confrontation no longer lingered as scandal, but blossomed into institutional reform. What once threatened reputational collapse had become a foundation for transformation, carried outward from Savannah's historic heart to boardrooms, classrooms, and communities worldwide. The polished chandeliers still glittered above marble floors, but now they illuminated not denial or dismissal, rather proof that accountability, when insisted upon, could reshape an entire industry. Apex Enterprises announced the creation of a $1.5 million fund dedicated to industry-wide bias training. The initiative, named the Ellison Standard Program, offered grants to hotels, restaurants, and service organizations willing to adopt measurable diversity metrics. Press releases explained their purpose clearly: equity as policy, not suggestion. Applications flooded in from chains, both large and independent properties, eager to align with Apex's principles and demonstrate that their institutions could be trusted to serve with dignity. Trade journals hailed the fund as precedent-setting, noting that few corporations had ever invested so heavily in moral reform without being compelled by regulation. Universities took note. Business schools across the country developed case studies around the Forsyth Grand incident. Professors dissected the events: Karen's dismissal, Tom's hesitation, Diane's scramble, Marcus's composed insistence, the live stream that galvanized thousands. Students debated whether shareholder value could coexist with social justice, only to discover through data that Apex's stock had risen after reforms. Loyalty deepened precisely because accountability had been demanded. MBA candidates wrote essays arguing that corporate contracts could be used as levers for fairness. Classroom walls echoed with the recognition that leadership in the 21st century required not only profits, but principles enforced with clarity. Karen, whose pale face had once embodied resistance crumbling beneath truth, now stood confidently at podiums in training centers. She had completed her 90-day immersion, absorbed painful lessons from testimonials, and emerged willing to share vulnerability as teaching. Alongside Tom, she led diversity workshops across Forsyth Grand branches. Her presentations began with an honest acknowledgement. I once failed. I once doubted the truth standing in front of me. Bias blinded me. Accountability forced change, and growth demanded humility. Tom followed with stories from his leadership workshops, recounting moments when silence nearly betrayed conscience and how choosing integrity had reshaped his approach. Together, they became an unlikely duo, once participants in conflict, now instructors modeling reconciliation and transformation. Diane, whose authority had wavered before public judgment, found renewed purpose in service beyond corporate walls. She accepted a seat on Savannah's Community Justice Board, joining activists, clergy, and educators to design policies that bridged institutions and neighborhoods. She attended monthly meetings beneath moss-draped oaks, listening to residents, recount experiences of exclusion, then carrying those lessons back into her corporate role. She realized her position was no longer confined to quarterly reports, but intertwined with civic trust. In speeches, she admitted, leadership is not measured only in revenue, but in whether communities recognize us as partners in justice. The Forsyth Grand itself transformed into a model for change. Tourists entered its lobby still captivated by crystal chandeliers and marble pillars, yet found new pride in its reputation as a case study in accountability. Brochures highlighted not only luxury suites and riverfront views, but also diversity commitments and community partnerships. Residents, once skeptical, now pointed to the hotel as proof that reform was possible when institutions listened. Guest satisfaction remained elevated, not because amenities had altered drastically, but because dignity infused every interaction, from check-in to check-out. Savannah's backdrop amplified the symbolism. Azaleas bloomed across squares in bursts of pink and white, their petals scattering across cobblestones as tourists walked by, reading about the hotel's story in travel magazines. Spanish moss swayed above benches where elders recalled earlier struggles for civil rights, recognizing in Marcus's insistence echoes of movements that demanded recognition decades before. Riverboats glided under twilight skies, their reflections shimmering alongside new conversations about justice woven into tours once confined to architecture and history. The city's charm no longer rested only in aesthetics, but in the narrative. That accountability had found a home there. News coverage did not fade. A year after the incident, major outlets revisited the Forsyth Grand, filming segments about its transformation. Cameras followed Karen and Tom during workshops, capturing their candid exchanges with staff. Reporters interviewed Diane at community meetings, highlighting her transition from corporate executive to civic advocate. Analysts reported on Apex's $1.5 million fund, detailing how over 40 hotels had already adopted compliance measures supported by the program. Headlines shifted from scandal to renewal, from bias to benchmark, how a Savannah hotel set industry standards. Marcus himself remained steady, declining interviews that sought to elevate him into celebrity. Instead, he released statements emphasizing, collective responsibility. This was never about one man's dignity. It was about systemic accountability. Institutions must understand that fairness is not negotiable. Our fund is not a charity. It is an investment in trust. His words circulated widely, quoted in journals, engraved into PowerPoint slides in classrooms, and referenced at hospitality conferences from New Orleans to Singapore. Mrs. Brooks smiled each time she passed a newsstand displaying headlines about the reforms. She reminded Donovan that movements are not sustained by single moments, but by continued voices. He updated his blog with progress reports, publishing testimonials from staff describing improved workplace culture. His readership continued to climb, propelled by the viral piece he had written months earlier. Comment sections filled with readers recounting their own experiences in service industries, echoing the ripple Marcus had sparked. One afternoon, Donovan joined his grandmother under the shade of an oak in Johnson Square. He read aloud a message from a hotel worker in Denver who had been inspired to challenge discriminatory practices at her property after reading his blog. Mrs. Brooks nodded, her eyes bright. "See," she said softly, "your words planted seeds far from here. That is how justice travels." Inside Forsyth Grand, staff meetings began with reflection periods, allowing employees to share insights from guests or co-workers about inclusivity. Posters in break rooms displayed commitments to dignity alongside quarterly diversity metrics. New hires underwent orientation sessions not only in hospitality service, but in cultural awareness, ensuring the lessons from that pivotal day became permanent practice. Karen often lingered after workshops, answering questions from skeptical managers who wondered if transformation was genuine. She confessed candidly, "Skepticism is fair. I once doubted myself too, but consistency proves truth. Watch our practices, measure our actions, and you'll see this isn't performance. It's change." Her willingness to acknowledge past failure gave her credibility no policy document could replicate. Tom spoke at local schools, telling students about the importance of integrity. He explained how hesitation nearly silenced him that day in the lobby, and how he vowed never again to let procedure outweigh humanity. His words resonated with young listeners who asked him how to speak up in their classrooms, jobs, and communities. "Strength belongs to all who choose it," he told them, echoing Marcus's original phrase, now etched into his identity. Diane chaired a Justice Board session that invited representatives from multiple industries. They studied Forsyth Grand's reforms as a template for accountability in banking, retail, and education. Civic leaders pointed to the hotel as proof that institutions could recover from failure if they embraced humility and transparency. Savannah, once thrust unwillingly into a global spotlight, now stood proudly as an example of resilience and renewal. As twilight descended one evening, the river glowed with amber light, azaleas perfumed the squares, and music drifted from a street performer's violin. Guests walking past the Forsyth Grand paused to admire its elegance, yet locals smiled knowingly, aware its beauty now included the deeper resonance of reform. The city had woven accountability into its charm, proving that history and progress could coexist under the shade of moss-draped oaks. The lesson reverberated beyond marble walls, beyond Savannah's borders, into an industry redefined by standards forged in one confrontation. Accountability had become expectation, dignity a metric, justice a practice. The story ended not as a scandal, but as a legacy. Your voice can shift industries. Share your experiences to drive change. Savannah's evening unfolded with a softness that only twilight could bring, where the sun slipped behind moss-draped oaks and the river reflected streaks of violet, gold, and silver. The city carried an air of calm renewal, though beneath its beauty ran the pulse of transformation born from conflict, accountability, and determination. The Forsyth Grand, once the center of a scandal, now stood as a monument to reform. Its marble lobby gleamed not only with polish, but with lessons etched into the very air, proof that purpose could emerge even from humiliation. Guests entered, through revolving doors carrying expectation, no longer for spectacle but for dignity. Staff greeted them with genuine warmth, shaped by training that extended beyond protocol into humanity. Marcus Ellison strolled along the riverfront promenade, the Rolex on his wrist marking hours not with urgency, but with reflection. Carriages rolled across cobblestones nearby, tourists snapping photographs of blooming azaleas that colored Savannah squares like paint strokes across a living canvas. The CEO of Apex Enterprises, once dismissed in that lobby, carried himself as he always had, with quiet authority, an aura of composure that required no theatrics. Yet tonight, away from boardrooms and contracts, his thoughts stretched beyond numbers. He considered the ripple that began with one confrontation, and now touched lives far beyond the city's boundaries. The Forsyth Grand had transformed in measurable ways. Guest satisfaction soared, staff engagement strengthened, and compliance programs became part of the daily rhythm. Karen, once frozen in bias, trained managers with humility. Tom, the hesitant guard, emerged as a mentor in leadership circles, reminding others to balance safety with fairness. Diane, the director, expanded her voice on community justice boards, bridging institutions with neighborhoods. Each figure, once caught in conflict, now embodies transformation. Their journeys reminded Marcus that purpose mattered more than punishment. Industry-wide, change continued as Apex's standards spread. 15 hotel chains adopted compliance policies, reinforced by a $1.5 million training fund. Universities wrote case studies, classrooms debated his calm insistence, and students learned that leadership meant more than quarterly profits. Lena, whose live stream once captured bias raw and unfiltered, evolved into a social justice influencer, teaching thousands that witnessing itself was power. Donovan's blog expanded into a platform, hosting voices from across industries, each story amplifying the truth that dignity must never be negotiable. Savannah, with its layered history, felt the shift too. Community groups cited the Forsyth. Transformation during forums on schools and policing, proof that accountability could ripple outward. Moss hung low over benches where elders whispered to children about marches long past, connecting old struggles to new victories. The city's timeless charm became the backdrop for a lesson that history was not a relic, but a present reality, written in the choices of leaders who refused to bend to silence. As Marcus paused near Johnson Square, he rested a hand on the back of a bench, gazing at azaleas glowing in the last threads of daylight. He thought of the crowd that once gasped as Diane revealed his title, the pale fear on Karen's face as truth was unveiled, the collective murmur as accountability was demanded. He remembered his own words. Apologies matter less than action. That principle remained his guide, for anger could ignite, but purpose sustained. He had chosen restraint over fury, insistence over spectacle, and in doing so created reform with permanence. The Rolex ticked softly, steady as the current sliding beneath bridges. He inhaled the evening air, scented faintly with river salt and blooming flowers, and allowed himself a quiet smile. For all the tension, for all the headlines, the most enduring legacy was not scandal, but the standards written afterward. His calm insistence had sparked a movement, proving dignity could be defended without rage. Purpose outweighed anger, and action reshaped an industry. Phones buzzed across the world still, as stories circulated online. Karen leading workshops, Tom speaking in schools, Diane collaborating with activists, Lena advocating through broadcasts, Donovan publishing voices of workers once silenced. Each narrative carried a fragment of that first lobby moment, each testimony proof that one refusal to accept humiliation had blossomed into collective transformation. The Forsyth Grand, standing illuminated beneath chandeliers, was no longer just a hotel, but a model for reform. Marcus reflected on the fragility of silence. Had he chosen anger without clarity, the confrontation might have ended as a spectacle rather than a precedent. Had he yielded to humiliation, bias might have triumphed, unchallenged. But he had chosen purpose, wielding contracts and compliance not to punish, but to reform. That decision resonated with thousands, no, millions, who had seen themselves in his calm resistance. The twilight deepened, shadows lengthening across cobblestones, lanterns flickering to life along the streets. Marcus turned toward the hotel, but before entering he paused, allowing his voice to carry softly into the evening air. Words meant not only for those nearby, but for every witness who had followed the journey from humiliation to resolution. "Purpose must always outweigh anger," he whispered, a reflection as much for himself as for the world. And so the story closed, not in bitterness, but in invitation. To every reader, every viewer, every witness, the call remained. Have you faced bias? Share your story below. Subscribe to Unity Stories for real-life accounts of courage and change. Hit the notification bell to join our movement. Together, we're rewriting the future.